Ani Bujo Tanzi Sega, welcome everyone. My name is Nochmoen Mushkogiashk, better known as Philip Cote III. I belong to the Underwater Panther clan and I'm also a band member of Moose Deer Point First Nations. Today I'm here to share with you a traditional land acknowledgement. ArtworxTO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2021, and the City of Toronto would like to acknowledge our presence on the land that has been the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples since time immemorial. And in 1805, with the signing of the Toronto Purchase, is now the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we reach back to those first Torontonians, we remember our Mother Earth through the 7 grandfather teachings: wisdom, bravery, respect, honesty, truth, humility, and love. The stories of each of these nations endure and continue to guide our thoughts and actions on this land. And as we acknowledge our Mother Earth, we acknowledge the medicine wheel and its teachings. We recognize the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west, and the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. It is these 4 seasons that represent the circle of life. Nindanoe Maganidak, which means all my relations, which means we are all related. Aho, miigwech matakriasan. Hey y'all, oh yeah.
For joining us this evening. I'm really excited to be back here with you for our 5th episode of the ArtworxTO Talk Series Live at 5. ArtworxTO is a full year of public art programming unfolding across the city of Toronto that aims to greatly diversify the opportunities for artists and audiences to engage in art. We have over 1,400 artists involved in this program and more than 300 new installations, murals, screenings, performances, and events unfolding over the year. We kicked off our year in the last quarter of 2021, and I'm really excited about what's on offer as we move into 2022. Over the year, the ArtworxTO Live at 5 talk series will highlight some of these projects, among other amazing public art initiatives taking place around town. My name is Rebecca Carbin. I am principal and founder of ART+PUBLIC UnLtd, and I've been working with the incredible ArtworxTO team on several aspects of the ArtworxTO program. In particular, Katrina Campitelli, I worked with on development of this talks program, as well as my own team, Sagan McIsaac and Michelle Choloschik, on its rollout. Live at 5 is a series of talks about some overarching issues within public art practices today. As we developed this program in the midst of a global pandemic that began as a health crisis and has morphed into a crisis that engages politics, social economics, and so many aspects of civic engagement, collective living, and public life, we decided to assemble our overarching issues with a central concern for different aspects of art and health. Personal, social, societal, physical, mental, and emotional. We want to engage with some of the numerous incredible programs and projects that Toronto's artists and arts workers are undertaking this and every year, and to invite discussion around the important intersection of art and wellness, when, if, and how art can better our personal, physical, social, emotional, mental health, individually and collectively. We've developed a program that will examine 5 themes over 10 events. I'm excited about this structure because it means giving our audience and moderators a chance to marinate on points of tension that arise within each chapter 1.
Sorry, can you slow down just a little bit? You're going really, really fast. Thank you for the interpreter.
Yeah. This means giving our audience and moderators a chance to think about some points of tension that arise in chapter 1 of each talk. Or a topic rather, and kind of go deeper with those points in the second chapter. So our earlier talks are available on demand if you missed them or love them so much you want to see them again. Tonight we're going into the first of 2 chapters on access, called All Access, Arts and Accessibility. Today's discussion centers around projects exploring questions of access and accessibility. If public art is about expression and communication in public, how do such questions inform a conversation about how public art comes to be in a place, to what end, and for whom? I'm particularly interested in having this conversation in an online platform. The internet as public space is a topic I've been interested in for many years, and our collective experience over the past 2 years has really come to change how we understand the role of our virtual forums play in the development of a collective narrative. And so with this talk, there is a folding in on oneself where we look at publicness and access. Having this talk online and recorded opens up all sorts of accessibility potential, but we do not want to fall into the trap of thinking everyone has access to computers, Wi-Fi, both essential components of access to this particular public space. We have some fabulous panelists tonight, and I'm super excited to hear about their artistic practices and how these practices inform thinking about access and accessibility. First, a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. Speak more slowly than I have. We're live for a quick 60 minutes. If you're watching us live on YouTube, feel free to type your questions for panelists into the comments, and we'll have a question period near the end of our hour. If you want to rewatch this video again later, as I mentioned, it's in the on-demand media library, the ArtworxTO media library, which can be found at ArtworxTO.ca. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing moderator. Sean Lee is Director of Programming at Tangled Art and Disability. Sean is an artist and curator exploring the notion of disability art as the last avant-garde. Orienting towards a CRIP horizon, he is interested in the transformative possibilities of CRIP community building and accessible curatorial practices that desire the ways disability can disrupt. Sean holds a BA in Arts Management and Studio from the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and is currently the Director of Programming at Tangled Art and Disability. In addition to his role at Tangled, Sean is an independent lecturer, speaker, and writer, adding his insights and perspectives to conversations surrounding disability arts across Canada, the United States, and internationally. Sean currently sits on the board of CARFAC Ontario, Creative Users Projects, and is chair of Toronto Art Council's Visual Arts and Media Arts Committee, and a member of the Ontario Art Council's Deaf and Disability Advisory Group. It is an honor to have you with us here today. Sean, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to provide a brief self-description. I am somebody who is male presenting. I use he or they pronouns, and I'm an East Asian Chinese person with light skin. I'm also visibly disabled. My back curves, my shoulders are uneven, and I'm quite short of stature. I've got long black hair that goes past my shoulders, and I'm wearing these like steampunk glasses. They're green with these gold rims that float on the frames. I'm in a black t-shirt, and I'm in just like my dining room. There's some twinkling lights behind me. So the order of our panelists today will be Lisa Anita Wegner, Devon Ostrom and Emily Gillespie from AccessArt, and Peter Owusu-Ansah. So Lisa Anita Wegner is a meta-gender filmmaker, producer, and storyteller with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, interested in the vital integration of disability culture into public art on the world stage. Lisa creates immersive multisensory universes in which to play, perform, and invite the audience in to experience the magic of her space-time portals. The overriding theme of her art being liberation through dreaming, Lisa believes that everyone is born an artist until the world knocks it out of us. Her work encompasses films, large-scale art installations, live theatrical performances, disruptions, and social experiments. You can find out more at mightybraveproductions.com. Our next speakers will be Devon Ostrom. Devon is a culture worker with 2 decades of experience in creating projects that bridge sectors, cities, and neighborhoods, typically involving assemblages of organizations, greatest hits, and collaborations, including a mural and research project in a maximum security prison, Arrivals Canada, thepanempath.com, and creating a levy on outdoor advertising that has raised over $100 million for art. Highlights also include organizing the first major exhibitions of street art at both the ROM and the AGO. Devon holds a Master's of Public Administrations with merit, an MA in Creative Curating, and is certified in HR and NPO Management. Devon has also taught cultural policy at the graduate level and postgraduate level. And currently, Devon is a producer with AccessArt.ca and researching the physical and sensory accessibility of public art spaces and creative access. Alongside Devon, we will also be hearing from Emily Gillespie. Emily is an author, disability activist, and professional daydreamer. They recently won the 2021 Dr. James Jameson Influential Alumni Award from Nipissing University. Gillespie has a BA in Gender Equality and Social Justice and an MA in Critical Disability Studies. They earned a certificate in creative writing from Concordia University. They have volunteered and worked in the disability community as an activist, researcher, and facilitator for 10 years. Gillespie is also an author and performance artist. Her work explores themes of memory, identity, and mental health journeys. They enjoy working in community spaces and examining individual and collective experiences. Dancing with Ghosts, Leaping Lion Books, 2017, is her first novel. Their poetry and short stories can be found in several journals and anthologies. She's currently drafting her second grant-funded novel. And finally, we'll have Peter Owusu-Ansah. Peter is a deaf visual artist. He believes we can communicate through our eyesight without words. In 2009, when he zoomed into one of his works of pop art, he became deeply curious about all the colors imaginable. Inspired by the pixelated colors and their connection to the nature of life, Peter uses Photoshop to create compositions that vibrate with energy. His works have been shown around Canada. Some of his works are privately collected in Toronto and New York. And in 2021, his work was acquired by the TD Bank for its corporate collection. He also won the Murray and Marvell Cawthor Founders Award at the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Lisa Anita Wegner.
Thank you, Sean. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'll do a little description to start, and I will try to speak slowly. I am a Caucasian human with long reddish hair. I have glasses on and compression on my hands. I also sit with a body braid, which helps me sit up, and I'm wearing a black and white striped shirt. I am the creator of Intangible Adorations Caravan, which is premiering with ArtworxTO this summer and then touring the world. Let's run the project introduction video and leave the sound on for about a minute to give you a sense of the work. Then I'll chat about this through the Access lens. Welcome to Intangible Adorations Caravan. It's a synthesis of two previous art projects, Triangle, Ascension into Another Golden Age, and Intangible Adorations, Experience the Icon. Triangle culminated in a 3-location Nuit Blanche in 2014. A persona of mine, Mama Dada, created light and wind-based portals and invited the audience into them with her. On the night, I decided to perform in my morph suit for the very first time. That was the birth of the Uber Marionette, which in time became the icon. Intangible Adorations is a multi-year project that ran at several venues, including Rendezvous with Madness. And I think this is about where I'm just gonna start chatting. I just wanted to show a little introduction to give a sense of the sounds and a bit of what this project is. So Intangible Adorations Caravan is my life story and the story of my disability. Someone said through a carnival mirror. Like David Bowie did for Stardust, I wanted to make the icon into a celebrity of sorts.
So the video, which will keep running, you'll see shows an evolution of the work. I've been creating immersive universes for about 15 years now. And I love surprising the audience with unexpected delivery of my art. And actually, that's why I'll just point in my little screen, I've created a little tiny portal in my actual environments to even just reflect that. I like to transport the viewer out of regular time and have a feeling of magical time. So about the project specifically, through the Tangled Performance Lab in 2020, I met Youssef Kadura and Harry Thomas and the Other Hearts Collective. And I brought on their whole collaborative team, as well as aerialist Aaron Ball and my performance art salon, which Emily Gillespie happens to be a member of, as an aside, another one of our panelists. And we have audio description, Kat Germain, and then Deaf Spectrum coming on to do deaf and ASL interpretation as part of every show. They are part of the universe and they are in costume with us. My experience with accessibility for the show it has a personal start. The character of the icon at the beginning used to dance, and as my mobility got worse, I brought in the throne. And a way to show how it was always in the actual creative fabric of the piece. I used to always fall and wipe out when I was performing. So I said the icon isn't from Earth, so I'm not used to the Earth environment. And we used the delicate nature of my body and how challenging life is as a kind of, as a rare and exotic thing, and made that, and crafted that into the story from the beginning. Also creating access for my salon performance troupe, which are part of the performers that I've been working with for years, has been something that's also been built into this project for several years. And Caravan now has given me the ability to start to learn about and implement access for the audience. And I created Intangible Adorations Caravan for a disabled audience. They are our VIPs, and that's truly who it's for. So I chose to make the audio description and the deaf and ASL interpretation, again, part of every show, not just as an add-on. It is truly part of the Caravan universe. And we're continuing to raise money actually to properly integrate those access features creatively and to have, universe building workshops to really, really integrate. As an artist creator like myself, creating internal and audience access more than doubles the workload and the budget. And I think it's necessary for cultural producers and artists to learn and know all these steps. And I'm really keen to start a conversation to bring about change in the way that arts funding is set up and the challenges of raising and managing larger amounts of funding. What's cool for me is people are excited about this show and people are equally excited about the robust access features. So that just really thrills me. Another important aspect is really important to us is the notion of taking back the freak show. And we are really keen to have this wonderful, magical experience that is, not at all about difference, but us really reclaiming that. For the tour, we are going to be working with disability arts organizations and using local artists as the reflections performers in each city, really customizing the show to local audiences. And we will be customizing the entire experience to, the audience where the show is. As the icon is holographic by nature and can easily bilocate or trilocate, and you've seen in the video, the icon is a masked character. We aim to ideally have 3 Intangible Adorations Caravans touring the world in time. I can say Intangible Adorations Caravan is my accessibility love letter to the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was incredible. I'd like to bring in our next panelists, Devon Ostrom and Emily Gillespie.
Thank you very much. Could we please have our slides up? I'll just start by describing myself. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be part of this group. I'm a white male with a brown beard and with small white hairs for every art project argument I've been part of. I'm wearing an oversized gray hoodie and with a black toque. And the camera's at kind of a funny angle because I'm currently in bed right now. Can you have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk about AccessArt. It's still in the formational stage. We're into phase 2 now. So from July to December of this past year, 17 deaf, disabled, and neurodiverse artists and guests worked together to develop new sensory and physical access standards or WISE practices for public art. And then we went on to assess about 400 or so pieces in Toronto and Waterloo to kind of test out to see if these actually work in reality. In phase 3, we're going to be analyzing and releasing the data and some educational material we've made. And in phase 4, we're going to start to think about tools to help artists create more accessible artwork and probably focus a little bit more on creative access. I'm going to hand it over to Emily now to talk about the phase 1 kind of co-design process that we went through to get to today. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Devon, and thanks for having me. So I'm Emily Gillespie. I'm a white person. I have blonde hair, pink glasses, and I'm sitting in a room with a painting behind me. So there is a lot in the slides that we're going to show next. I would encourage you to go to AccessArt.ca and look at the slides. And there are visual descriptions and posters. For the next slides, I'm going to do an image description followed by a few key points about the material. There are so many take-homes that I'm just doing a few key pieces. So the first slide, the visual summary contains information from the first session. It features a black and white drawn portrait of the guest speaker, Sean Lee, here today. In the top left, they have shoulder-length hair, glasses, and a dark top. There are blue text bubbles, yellow brush strokes, and green accents all around. A spaceship zooms across the center of the image. The main learnings from the session is that access is political, relational, and creates community. So I had the pleasure of facilitating the 4-week Access Art consultation series with deaf, disabled, and neurodiverse artists. The first week with Tangled guest Sean Lee, we discussed what makes folks feel safe accessing public art. And one of the take-homes is that access is critical and creative and moves beyond simple checklists. It was clear that for real access, we need not only think about meaningful physical spaces accessible, but ensure that there are opportunities for deaf, disabled, and neurodiverse artists to create. Next slide, please. So the image description. The drawn visual summary contains information from the second session. It features black and white portraits of the guest speaker, David Leposki, and Thea Curdy on the left. In the center is a drawing of David bumping into an angled and unmarked pillar, and a picture of the Mona Lisa with arrows pointing to lips, a hand, an ear, a nose, an eye, denoting that art should be multi-sensorial experience. On the right, blue and green text bubbles float above a drawing of a public art piece made of blue poles sticking out of the ground at unsafe angles. Core information is that access is an opportunity rather than challenge against creativity, and that access benefits everyone. So from week 2, again, we had special guests David and Thea. We discussed the idea of public art being a place for universal design so that the most number of people and artists can access the art. Accessibility doesn't just benefit disabled folks, it benefits everyone. One of the strongest things that came through during the session is that access is an opportunity for creativity. For example, you can create multi-sensory public art. Next slide, please. So this drawn visual summary contains information from the third session. On the left are black and white portraits of the guest attendees from the City of Toronto, Katrina, and Johnson, with City Hall in the background. In the center is a confused stick figure looking at a signpost that says applicant. On the right, blue and green text bubbles float beside social media symbols. There's also a number of solutions and barriers listed, and creative access is defined as a system clarity, paid mentorship, decision-making power, and feedback. So we reflected on how to make the public art commissioning process better for disabled artists in week 3. And highlights include a support package for emerging artists, system clarity, paid mentorship, decision-making power, and feedback. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And Devon's posting the draft job description. So here is a link to one of our phase 1 policy recommendations for the city and the Toronto Arts Council to hire dedicated creative access officers. And check out the job description. Although lots of agencies have a person on the access file, it is important to have a dedicated contact and for this to be a job. 1 in 5 Canadians have a disability, and unless the institutional capacity is there, we're missing out on a lot of great projects and art. And the final week of the sessions, new slide please. The drawn visual summary contains information from the 4th session. On the left is a black and white portrait of Philip Cote, an Indigenous knowledge keeper. In the bottom corner, the question, how do we move forward both in refining shared tools, case building, and improving access to creation? At the top center, why is it important that deaf, disabled, neurodiverse artists can shape public spaces? A collection of ideas surround and connect these 2 questions. Keynotes are to not be afraid to break traditional rules of engagement with art, and that this can lead to new possibilities. We talked about why it's important for disabled artists to shape public spaces. The question that I want to continue to ask is, how is public art if not everyone can experience it? Thanks, and over to you, Devon.
Devon, you're on mute.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Can we hop forward one more slide, please? Thank you, Emily. So to start sort of case building in phase 2, we went out and started doing actually field testing of some of these kind of standards we came up with in that 4-week process that Emily was just talking about. Up on the screen is a image of by Shane Ravel, and it depicts an artist wearing PPE and doing a site assessment. The site assessment and the visual description that they submitted was, this is a bright mural with the yellow tiger-like animal in the center, with purple stripes and fuchsia features. Its back says pride. There are waves of blue, purple, and fuchsia in the foreground with a turtle on the left that says, welcoming, on its shell in corresponding colors. On the right of the tiger, there are 3 yellow mushrooms with blue and purple underbellies. The mushroom caps read diversity, accepting, and inclusive respectively. Next slide, please. So after our group literature review and excessive consultations and talking with experts and then trying to narrow down our criteria of what we are actually looking for, we came up with these kind of 14 key things we are looking for as sort of wise best practices. And these are still evolving, but we're getting there. And there are things like green space, rest areas, a quiet space, paved path, visual descriptions, a spacious path, cane detectable, level ground, a needed ramp, identified as disability led, tactile art, tactile signage, large text signage, an audio guide, sound art. And the most important things for me are really the ones marked in yellow here. As an artist and a curator, I'm super interested in how we create more humane and healing and reflective spaces, particularly in this sort of pandemic context. And I think that there's lots of really interesting creative opportunities there in working with different textures and thinking about how art can be read in more than just visual ways. Next slide, please. So one of the other aspects of this project is we were doing these 360 captures. And this is an image of a 360 capture of Sir Casimir. It's a bronze bust on Toronto waterfront, surrounded by concrete pillars. And we are testing, I think, 4 or 5 different systems right now to see how we could allow people to preview spaces and trip plan, and also help researchers who are stuck at home still participate in the project. And as an interesting side effect, this also helps city staffers maintain state of good repair on sites. It's much easier to send someone a specific GPS and a photograph of a problem that you've identified than it is to do anything else, pretty much. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just a rough map of where we are right now. It's an image of Toronto with ward boundaries, crowded with about 500 or so pins that are open or in progress. And we're in the process of taking all this data that we've collected and then creating a platform to feed multiple other platforms with the data that we've collected. We really want to focus on collecting data, analyzing data, and then passing it on to other partners. Next slide, please. So some of the preliminary data that it's not really ready to show yet, but I'm going to show some anyway. So it's up on the screen is a pie chart showing what percentage of the spaces we found that were quiet. And right now it indicates about only 16% of public art pieces are located in a quiet space. And the kind of space that people kind of normally associate with art and reflection and art experiences in general. Next slide, please. So the next slide is a pie chart around cane detectability. And our preliminary data indicates that about a minimum of 14% of public art pieces have some sort of cane detectability problem, meaning that there's an obstruction at head height, which can cause quite a bit of injury for some people. Or it has not only either have a cane unmarked head clearance problem that has been marked on the ground, or it has an unmarked hole or depression in the ground. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly show these next 2 slides as a thank you to all the people that were involved in this project. The next slide shows 29 people and hand drawings. It includes artists, researchers, special guests, and staff. Each drawing has a colored block frame and is done in a loose, fun style. Most of the people are smiling and looking directly at the viewer. The drawings were done by Sarah Lafresne. Next slide, please. So, and I'd also like to thank the Canada Council of the Arts for making this possible, and ArtworxTO, and Tangled Art Disability for all the advice and support, and North York Arcs, and Access Now, Creative Users Projects, City of Toronto, the Inclusive Design Research Center, and Arts Pond, which we're lucky enough to be our project incubator. Thank you very much for having us.
Such incredible work. Thank you both, Devon and Emily, for everything you're doing around public art with AccessArt. And I'd like to invite Peter Owusu-Ansah to speak to his practice next.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Peter, and I am a black man. I have a short beard with black and some gray hair as well. And I'm wearing a black t-shirt and my background is a yellow wall. And I have a small table beside me with a plant. And there are some flowers next to me as well. And it's kind of growing as it will. So I wanted to speak to everybody and show some of the homeland art. And what I mean by that, and what that means to me, is when I arrived in Canada, it was about 1994. And what I'd often do when I arrived is I just walk the streets and observe and look around, and Toronto became something that was really ingrained in me as my home. So as I would walk around and see the sights, again, this was around 1994, the city was going through a lot of changes at the time. And it looked like kind of the old city was very dark and drab, and it started to kind of open up a little bit more. And, I've been watching since then to look to see where the deaf and disabled creatives were, where that community was. And, every once in a while I would see art pieces and installations, but it was never by deaf or disabled artists, that I could tell at least. So it was very, very often that if a deaf or disabled artist did emerge, it was very ephemeral. It would disappear quickly. And so I wanted to kind of explore how we could create some consistency for deaf and disabled arts, and for people to be able to identify the artists that were involved. I always had this kind of gut feeling that perhaps hearing able-bodied people were the ones who were the ones that were creating the art, and they were satisfied with what was already out there. And I didn't see enough colors. And so I kind of looked within myself. I started analyzing the art a little bit more. And I did that work on myself as well. And I realized, just internally, I realized that I perhaps didn't have a clear sense of self. And with the art what the art is that I liked, and to create my own thing. So I started to kind of look for other artistic influences that would help me understand my truth and who I was and what type of art I wanted to put out. So something that was very important about this is that I needed to find my true self before I started to create. And I think that to make art, it's not something you can fake or pretend. Sometimes it's going to be good, and sometimes it'll be good enough, and perhaps not. But how is it possible for me to show my true self and to know who I was feeling and show what my feelings looked like? So what I did is that's when I discovered the colors and the spectrum. And the colors themselves, it feels almost like when you see a rainbow. You see so many different beautiful colors in the sky. But where do you see those colors in other places? Like the pinks, the reds, the blues, the yellows, oranges, greens. All of those colors, in what other places do you see them in such a composition? And just the backdrop of the blue sky. You can always look up and see the blue, but there isn't often much more than that consistently. And of course, as the sun rises and as the sun sets, you would get to see some more of those darker hues and And so which one of those kind of fit me the best? So as I looked at, this varying sky of colors and the consistency of blues, and depending on the time of day, I thought, blue is a color I really enjoyed. But I wanted to see some more different hues of blue. And even when the sun set, you would see a different color of blue, or even first thing in the morning. So sometimes I would imagine the blue, even if it wasn't the sunniest day, or if it was a cold day, how I felt about those blues and how it would change. And for example, this is one of my images here. So I started to explore all the different depths of colors, and what I was trying to capture here is that not just a singular time, such as sunset or sunrise or midday, but to show them all at the same time. That's like kind of through the course of many days, the different blues that you might see. So that was something that I really connected with, the idea of all these blues. And as well, just my emotional scale. I wish I had the words for it to explain it, or to be able to show what that is and what that looks like. So, and to show that it's possible for humans to be able to share or to be able to empathize with one another. And for sure you can do that if you can express that emotion, perhaps. And so as I started to look at more art and explore more, I found a relationship with more things and more colors. And so as I connected with more and more things and different artists and different people, I wanted to use that to communicate and to communicate those emotions. Sometimes you don't have the words to capture what you're trying to say, but to show who you are is something that's very important. And as a deaf person, sometimes we feel very isolated as we travel this earth, and as we go through these journeys. And I do have many friends who are deaf, but I don't live close to all of those friends. So what that means is sometimes during the course of my day, I'm doing it in isolation, and my eyes are my best asset. And I do enjoy just looking around and being able to take a lot of those sceneries in. And also even to be able to communicate and to chat with hearing folks. But sometimes, I have to write back and forth if they don't know sign. Does everybody want to do that? Does anybody care that I'm even deaf? And sometimes you kind of feel pushed to the side. And so what I wanted to show was some of the visualization of who I am. So that's really, sorry if I said a lot, but that's how you can see kind of hopefully a little bit of inspiration from my art.
Wow. Thank you, Peter. It was such a privilege to be able to hear everybody today just speak to their practice and to learn more. There's a lot that's resonated with me, and I'd like to bring the group back just to have a discussion. And I'd like to remind everyone that if those who are watching this live stream, feel free to put some questions into the chat there on YouTube. But I wanted to start by thinking about some of the themes that were touched on today. Lisa and Peter spoke to how disability art really brought their truth, their true selves into their artistry, about how that lived experience imbued their art. And then Devon and Emily, the work that you do, considering, who actually feels connected and how can we feel connected to public art that perhaps doesn't have us as disabled folks, as deaf, mad, disabled folks in mind. Are we part of that public? And so I wanted to actually just bring that question back to all of us. what actually makes public art accessible to you? And I'd like to bring it to anyone, no order necessary, if anyone would like to jump in. Peter.
Really, it was important for me to be able to see each of the, like in Canada, for example, and across Canada, to see more of who the deaf and disabled folks are that are creating art. So I want to just learn more about that without having to do a deep dig of research. So there's a lot of imaginations and creativity out there. But do we always have to go to a museum to see art? And when we do, it's always hearing folks. It's always hearing able-bodied folks. And so, we've been pigeonholed into this one way of thinking. And, by that, am I being viewed on as lesser than as an artist? So, access is an emotional thing, and being given the opportunity to be seen. And to share my experiences.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, there are so many colonial ways in which art has been kind of structured, and I think disability art holds that power. That's what to really break us from those molds. I see Devon has also raised his hand. I'd like to, Devon, please.
Yeah, I would definitely say that disability-led art is having the opportunity for artists to create and participate. It's difficult with public art because it's probably one of the most, in a way, exclusionary to create, but most public at the same time. Like if you think about the resources required, the entry costs in order to spend months sketching and the regulatory barriers, it's a pretty difficult thing to participate in. And then also for more of a personal level, I'm pretty afraid of falling, so I prefer to have art pieces that are cleared around them and grippy. That's all.
Yeah. No, definitely. Thank you. And Emily, would you like to also speak to that as well?
Sure. So I had a few thoughts with this. So I was part of the researchers kind of doing the tour of the public art places around Toronto. So one thing, because of my disabilities, a good map. I love a good map. Can I clearly get there, or am I going on a goose hunt because of my disabilities? Maps are harder for me to follow. So is it well marked? I'm autistic and I love art that I can engage with multi-sensory experiences. Can I touch it? Can I go up to it and feel it? I always think about is there a sitting area? Can I rest here? Can I reflect here? Is there somewhere quiet? And who is this made by? Is this for me? Is this about me? Is this something that, disabled folks have helped or participated in? And where is that information? Like Peter mentioned, not having to go search for it. And I just want to bring us back to some of the points I brought up are part of the assessment tool that AccessArt created, kind of a checklist for, not that there's actually a checklist in real life, but checklist for some of the things to consider about making public art accessible. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lisa.
Thank you, Sean. Making public art accessible. I have some of the same similar that Emily said. I actually find it very difficult to leave my home. So often, sadly, I just don't go to stuff. And I have actually an example that I remembered when I'd read these questions in advance of a piece that, while it wasn't deliberately made to be accessible to me, it happened to be, and it really stayed in my memory. In 2003, I saw the Weather Project at Tate Modern. It is inside the Tate Modern, but everything was free there, so I felt like it was public art. It was flat and easy to get into, and then because I have such an exhaustion problem, it was set up like, so it was called, yeah, so it was set up like a big sun inside, almost like the beach, and it had that transportative, and then I could lie on the ground. Often in my life, people are like, get up, keep moving, you can't lie there. So to be invited in somewhere, quiet, I could immediately lie down and be on the ground. It was an incredible experience, and it stayed with me all these years. I looked it up to get the name of it. That was inadvertently for me.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and it's so interesting because even just with our panel, what is an accessible piece of public art is so different to each of us. And oh, Peter, I saw you raised your hand. I actually have a question from the audience for you as well, though. Would you like me to tell you what that question is? Maybe you can fold your thought in.
Well, one thing that I just think is really important is the that's really important about the societal control and about how the art systems and art spaces are designed. So, for example, with for example, how Tangled curates and how they do things with disabled folks involved, and I've been there, but it's really great to see that. And from the arts community, I'm sure nationwide, there is so much control over what is an acceptable art space, and it doesn't include the deaf and disabilities. And so the idea of that is something that I really struggle with. And I think that there really needs to be some kind of overhaul there, or a voice that's in there that makes the change that represents us. And that's something that I find very important. And that's the goal.
Definitely, yes. And there's actually a really lovely question in the chat for you, Peter. This is from an audience member. No, this is from someone I know very well, Jess Sash. So they asked Peter, I love how you spoke to your practice and to isolation. Thank you for naming that. I'm curious what your favorite memory of someone else interacting with your art might be.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I think it's really just seeing how individuals identify with it, and especially if I'm there, they can become very immersed in it, but then they come straight to me and want to talk about it more, and that's something that I find is the best part of the experience, because and they're ready to communicate because there's something that we can empathize with, something that we share in common, and and all that came from was just looking at my art. Like, they just looked at something I made, and boom, we had an instant connection. So those are my favorite types of interactions I have around my art.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really inspiring and it's warming to feel. So, and it's just two people connecting.
Definitely, yeah. Your art acts as a point of kind of like a moment of connection, which is really lovely. We have another question to the group. Is there any mandatory, quote unquote, inclusive member in juries that choose which piece is going to be placed? I guess this is kind of a larger question. For either public art or your own experience, do folks know if there's any sort of mandatory inclusive perhaps framework that is put in to ensure that there's, you know, access or inclusivity.
For me, I think for the deaf community, it really depends who the people are that are interested in being involved. Whether they're willing to be on a board or to be on a staff, or if they're just artists or what it is. So I think that it's important to have the doors open for deaf artists that want to be part or to be more included in things. And of course to have the access. So to be truly inclusive doesn't just mean, you know, something that is very limited or for a limited time or to a point or something very simple. There's much more ways to become totally inclusive for deaf individuals. So I think that's a big part about and sometimes all a deaf person needs is an interpreter. And to have an interpreter creates some access, which is great, but sometimes people are just like, okay, we'll get you the interpreter this one time. But why not welcome them into it, have them be part of the process, have deaf folks on your boards? That's an important step as well. Yeah, access needs inclusion too.
Definitely. And I think Devon wanted to comment too.
I think we'd have much more beautiful, humane cities if 1 in 4 people on juries were from a deaf and disabled background. And I think, and 1 in 5 art dollar also went to the deaf and disabled arts community. That would be a population reflective share of resources.
Thank you, Devon. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that even though we do have deaf and disability arts funding, it doesn't really reflect the size and scope in which our population is. Emily, I see that you've got your hand raised, so I'd like to invite you, and I think then we have to wrap it up.
I just, to close, I wanted to complicate this and say that thinking about even the folks on this panel, we all have such different experiences in our bodies and with disability, and that myself, I've been brought into spaces to talk about disability, or, you know, I've also sat on a jury, but I don't know everything about accessibility. I'm still forever learning. I don't know everything about every disability. So we need, in my opinion, we need more disabled, deaf, mad, neurodiverse folks in these spaces, but we also can't suggest you brought in one disabled person, therefore the disability box is checked, because I really don't want that token kind of like, okay, here's one person and they speak for, you know, everybody or understand and know everything. Because for me, accessibility and learning is always continued process, and I only know my limited lived experience and what I've learned, but it's not everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Like, it's so great to complicate that, right? I think our community, our disability, mad, deaf community is so expansive and so diverse. The art that you can experience and the people that you'll meet are, there is no single way to make something accessible. And so I think that's such a beautiful point and a great way to wrap up. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Lisa, Devon, Emily, and Peter for all your generous insights and really beautiful practices. I did, before we close, just want to mention that the next talk is on March 9th at the same time at 5 p.m. It's going to be the last of these two panels discussing, you know, how questions about access and accessibility inform a conversation about how public art comes to be in a place, to what end, and for whom. And so I just want to say thank you again for this invitation to be here today, to hold space for one another. And thank you as well, Rebecca, for bringing us all together. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah.